in 122 days. We each have the power to decide what kind of country we want to live in. Understand what we know. When there has been a full on intentional attack against hard fought, hard won freedoms and rights.
Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known, and a lot of campaigning going on. Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris in New Orleans for Essence Fest. Joining us this morning is Lauren Burke. Of course, Lauren, you know Lauren. Y'all know Lauren, and Lauren is loaded for bear this morning. I'm sure. There's a lot of craziness, Lauren. We were going to have Representative Ron Reynolds on this morning. Apparently, they have some sort of weather situation there in Texas, and he has no power. So what it's just you and I, Lauren. Just you and
Good.
I. And
That's
let's
cool.
start.
Hopefully he's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, she's wearing the Yankee hat. Somewhere I got a Met hat around here somewhere, so we can be rivals there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what we do join together is our love of the Knicks. So
Yeah, I don't hate the Mets actually. I kind of like every New York team and every Virginia team. But
yeah,
Virginia doesn't have any professional sports teams, but I grew up,
right.
of course, with the Yankees and going to see Reggie Jackson and Willie Randolph and all the
Uh,
rest. So,
Chris Chambliss.
yeah, Chris Chambliss. Yeah, absolutely.
Listen,
Absolutely.
I don't hate the Yankees either. You know what taught me to be a lover of all New York teams, with the exception, I have some exceptions. I
Mhm.
can't love the
Mhm.
Nets. I can't love the Islanders.
Mhm.
But when I lived in Los Angeles, when I was sentenced to 7 years of living in Los Angeles in the San
Right.
Fernando Valley,
Right.
um, uh, I rooted hard for the Yankees, especially in the playoffs. Is when I still root for the Yankees when the playoffs start. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Let's see what they do this year. You never know what they're going to do. That's for sure.
look, they came out like a house of fire this
Yeah.
season, and now things are kind of
Cooling off.
they
That
hit
always happens.
a rough patch.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens every time.
We will see. Meanwhile, the Mets are middling at 500, so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we'll see. But Lauren, a talk radio station, Word, WURD in Pennsylvania, parted ways with one of his hosts after she used questions provided by Joe Biden's campaign during his first post-debate interview last week. Sarah Lomax, the president and CEO of Word, announced yesterday that Biden's interview with the source host, Andrea Lawful Sanders, was arranged and negotiated independently without knowledge, consultation, or collaboration with Word management. Lawful Sanders violated the station's standard of journalistic independence and mutually agreed to part ways with the station effective immediately, is what Lomax confirmed. But I mean, let's just cut out the mumble jumbo. I mean, she and another guy from Word went on CNN, and what was the point of all of this, Lauren? I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to kick it to you first.
Well, my first thought is that WURD is actually about to have an interview with Sarah Lomax on this very topic. Literally, that hit is at 7:40, and I'm trying to sneak watch that. But at any rate, I will say that as somebody who owns a little media outlet, Black Virginia News. When you have some people in your employ, you have to make sure that they know what the rules are uh, in a standard way, particularly in this world that we live in of citizen journalists and people who are involved in journalism who have not been formally involved in journalism, meaning worked at a big news organization. When I worked at ABC News and USA Today, and I was a freelancer, a contract photographer for Associated Press, there were rules that you were made aware of. And I can remember signing for the best practices guide. I can remember being told at ABC that we couldn't attend certain events because they were political. And certainly that was the case even more at USA Today. So you become aware of the general rules of journalism.
Right.
Earl Ingram and Andrea Lawful Sanders are not career journalists. In fact, I don't think they're journalists at all. They're
Right.
community people who speak on community matters on a regular basis, but that's not what they did in their professional career. So I say all that to say that trading questions, which is not completely uncommon before interviews. So people do sometimes ask, what will the questions be? Communications directors, which I have been, I will ask people, what are the questions going to be? I don't generally furnish the questions, but, if you get into a discussion with somebody about, hey, what are we talking about? That could conceivably happen. And I think part of what happened here is that Earl Ingram and Lawful Sanders did not know the standard rules of journalism. But a media organization, and when you run a media organization, you have to be clear to your folks that work there what the rules are. And particularly in these moments where the media is losing money, the business model is failing, and you have a lot of people who are effectively volunteers or people who did not work at some big news organization. And so they may not know. And I suspect they did not know what the rules were in a standard ethical manner when it came to interviewing the president of the United States.
The fact that it made it to CNN, the fact that they were on CNN, and that they made such a big deal out of this, it to me is just intentional. I mean, look, the Biden campaign pointed out that there are many examples and recent examples of Trump refusing in recent months to answer questions from local news outlets in which he did not approve. We're not making a big deal out of that. We have, on this program, have had folks on who have suggested questions. That doesn't mean we use them. Some of them, and you pointed out in a text message, some of those questions that the Biden campaign actually gave to Word were questions we want to know.
Right.
They were not just, fluff stuff.
Here's the other thing, Stacey. Here's the other thing, even bigger. We had a whole ass media organization called Fox News be revealed as a communications counselor for a president of the United States. That would be Fox News's relationship with Donald Trump. I'm not sure. There were some personnel who were fired after that. I'm not sure if that was the reason, but that seemed to be standard practice at Fox News. So it's interesting to watch the commentary on this situation with regard to Ms. Lawful Sanders, particularly from CNN, that's struggling right now financially. CNN trying to sort of go, oh, we're going to be mini MAGA and all this other nonsense. They go after Lawful Sanders. But what did they say when Fox News was revealed in federal court to be a counselor to a president of the United States? And it wasn't just one member of the Fox News staff. It was standard practice. And they get credentialed from the radio, TV gallery, and everybody else on Capitol Hill because we're all pretending that they're a media organization instead of what they really are, which is a political organization masquerading as media. That's what Fox News is for the most part. Shout out to my friend Chad Pergram, who works at Fox, but is a very good reporter, and I think a very good example of how you can be at a biased news organization and still report accurately and fairly.
Well, and just to add to that, with the CNN, and we on this program, we appreciate Abby Phillips. We think she do a really good job over at CNN. However, was way out of pocket talking about how this was a disrespect to Black media. It was not. What was a disrespect to Black-owned media was what your network, Abby, CNN, did to lock out Black-owned media from the debate. What is disrespectful is your outlet, CNN, continues to be, as Lauren so succinctly put it, mini MAGA. That's disrespectful. The fact that the Biden campaign, and folks, not the White House, and that was the distinction that needs to be made here. It was the campaign, not the White House, that provided those questions. Abby knows her producers will go over questions with guests all the time. We know that we are in a world where we have publicists, you have comms directors that are going to provide what they want to hear. They're going to provide some questions they feel like is better suited for their person. And there's nothing wrong with them doing that. What would be wrong is to masquerade it as, okay, if you're just going to use their questions as, something that you came up with. But my thing is they had every right to decline that.
Right. Well, they should have declined, or they should have just told the audience, we have been provided the questions from the Biden campaign.
Right.
or the president has been allowed to see the questions before this interview.
Right.
That happens all the time. There's no big shame in saying to the audience, just be transparent. I'm not sure. I get Abby Phillips' point. She's making the point that if you're not doing it with everybody else, why are you doing it with black media? Because there is some disrespect there with regard to pretending that people are children. They would have never done that with ABC or NBC. The Biden
So
campaign.
wait, but Lauren, you
Biden
don't
campaign.
think that the campaign on both sides have suggested questions to ABC and NBC?
Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. I know George Stephanopoulos because I work with him at ABC. There ain't no way you can tell me that George Stephanopoulos would ever go for, oh, we're going to give you
Well,
questions.
that's the point, though. He may not have gone for it, which is what Word could have done too. Say, hey, no, no, no,
Well, but
no.
the thing is, the campaign would have never said to George Stephanopoulos, we're going to suggest questions. And that is what I think part of what Miss Phillip is talking about when she says disrespect to black media. Hang on one second. I'm just going
It's
to
still
rig
that's
my
okay.
iPad.
It still
Keep
amounts to
talking.
the pot calling the kettle black, though,
Go,
right? I mean, see
go to
it.
the one
Are you
shot,
speaking
Greer.
from? I'm sorry.
Go to the one shot, Greer.
You speaking from CNN. It's to me you have absolutely no room to speak out. It's you're done as far as credibility is concerned. So now to come back 2 weeks after the debacle of a debate that you hosted, that two of your anchors hosted and allowed a man to sit there for 90 minutes and lie and lie and lie, and we focus on the old man who didn't get enough rest.
Yeah, what you're seeing is establishment media sitting in Washington, D.C. at the White House and Capitol Hill and in some air conditioned studio down the street from Union Station wants to slap black media because you shouldn't have gotten these interviews anyway. What were you doing getting these interviews anyway?
100%.
That's part of the jealousy of it. Okay. That's why everybody's like, oh, they got fired. Ooh, these types of games get played in the media all the time. I don't know what they're talking about. I mean, I
Yeah.
watched the New York Times put a criminal level allegation into print
Oh
because two
yes.
attorneys that they worked with decided that somebody had done a crime who was the lieutenant governor of Virginia. Even though that wasn't true, the New York Times took their word for it. That there was a relationship between those attorneys and the New York Times. Okay, so this idea that we don't in the media have close relationships with people and you're trading information and questions and that to me is ridiculous. So it's
Right.
interesting to see that Victor Blackwell is suddenly so interested in
Right.
asking a black media organization about every little question that they've asked, but he's less interested in the fact on the same day, by the way, there was a neo-Nazi march in Tennessee and
Yeah, which is
nobody
what we're
talks
gonna.
about that at
Yes.
CNN.
Yes.
CNN is failing. CNN has the lowest ratings of the big three cable. And I think they'll do anything or blow anything up to try to get attention, which is what this game has become about more than anything. So I'm telling you, that is a double standard in terms of their reaction to Miss
Right.
Lawful Sanders.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And speaking of that white nationalist march, the Patriot Front in Nashville. See, this is the thing too, Lauren. So this is what we, instead of worrying about an 81-year-old man who didn't get enough rest and couldn't perform up to normal standards at a debate. How about this? I mean, the fact that we have this so openly in 2024 is a testament to what happened in 2016. It's a testament and a reaction, of course, to Barack Obama's 2 terms of presidency. It is just what Donald Trump has in store. This is just a glimpse. And as we said, January 6th was just a dress rehearsal of what's to come. And we're seeing this, Lauren, with the Supreme Court. We're seeing it with this Project 2025, which part of Project 2025, some parts anyway, are already in effect.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if CNN spent as much energy on Project 2025 as they did Miss Lawful Sanders' interview, and of course the destruction that former President Trump wants to rain on this country if he gets into office again? Wouldn't it be nice if somebody talked about that for a segment or two? But this is a game of what story can we put on to get the most attention? And I guess CNN has decided that what Donald Trump is doing is normal. So they've made that, oh, that's not really news anymore. Are you kidding me? On a week when we're having the Democratic Party openly discuss changing their nominee, their presumptive nominee, President Biden, you're in here talking and doing segments with Earl Ingram and Lawful Sanders about their interview with Joe Biden. The real story of that interview, by the way,
Uh-huh.
is that the White House, that the campaign, and by the way, let's not be naive. There's no way that Anita Dunn has no say in what the campaign is doing. Jen O'Malley Dillon and Anita Dunn, I'm sure, have a say in all operations that are Joe Biden. Okay. And I know there's supposed to be a legal separation, but the reality of it is I'd be very surprised to find
Right.
that Jen O'Malley Dillon and Anita Dunn don't have any say in campaign decisions. Okay. So the problem here is that, we're talking about all this other stuff, and we've got a bunch of people who are calling themselves the Republican Party on the MAGA right who want to destroy this country as we know it. Where's the attention going to that? And I have a problem. Everyone should have a problem with disproportionate reporting on things that are fly by night, flash in the pan style stories, though they may be interesting. The real story there was that Biden's people didn't think he could handle an off the cuff interview and had to supply questions. That's the real
Right.
story. The question there is, why did they think that that was true? And
Right.
that's what Victor Blackwell should be on, and Abby Phillip. I'm sure she will be. The question of why did they think they had to set up questions with WURD or anybody else?
Right, right. It's true. But again, I do maintain, and you're right, I'm not disputing you, but I do maintain that I found that to be a pretty normal practice of folks offering talking points. But you know, we certainly, I know Greer and I say it all the time, and she's definitely, go ahead, send your questions. That doesn't mean we're going to use them, and 99% of the time we don't use them. So
There's obviously a discussion about what are we going to talk about. I mean, so
uh,
I think that what probably happened here was the campaign was talking to Lawful Sanders and said, hey, well, what are we talking about? And let's suggest a few things. And that turned into formally sending the questions. And again, Lawful Sanders, if you look at her resume,
right,
is not a journalist.
right,
And let me tell you something, there's nothing wrong with that. Jen Paskey is sitting on the air at MSNBC. She used to work for Joe Biden.
right,
Al Sharpton, who I enjoy very much, Al Sharpton has never said he's a journalist, so this is not his fault. But if
right,
somebody gives you a TV show and a platform like that, you're going to take it as you should, right? But we live in a world in journalism where there is no licensing.
mhm,
Everybody can wake up in the morning. The First Amendment effectively says anyone can wake up in the morning and say they're a journalist. So Lawful Sanders, I suspect, did not know, which means no offense against Miss Lomax over at WURD. But when that request came in and you're interviewing the president of the United States, which I suspect Word has not had that opportunity particularly often,
right,
you got to lock that down. You got to be in communication with Jasmine Harris and the campaign and everybody else. So if somebody called me and said, "Oh, we want to give an interview to Black Virginia News for your podcast or for your, newsletter," I'm going to be all over that, finding out the
right.
details. Okay, what are we doing? What are the rules? It probably happened really fast. And they said, yes, it's an exciting thing for the station as it should be. But that to me is the responsibility of the owner or the editor or the
Right.
managing editor of the operation.
Well, without question, and once again, you nailed it. She's not a journalist, right? She probably don't fully understand these types of rules, if you will. And here's the other part of that: the fact that she's not a journalist, the fact that she has an opportunity. I don't care who's president. The fact that you have an opportunity to sit down with the president of the United States. Um, she probably asked for questions. She probably was looking for direction, being in her
Right.
situation. So
She may
you're
have
right.
been. I
The
mean, it's
real story is not that they provided questions, but the real story is why did they feel the need
right.
to provide questions?
And it's an overwhelming thing to get a call from the White House. Obviously, the White House wanted, I think, him to sort of practice before he got to Stephanopoulos. Whatever the reason was, that's fine. But I'm sure for the station, for WURD, and for Earl Ingram, this was a very exciting thing. that Miss Lawful Sanders has been fired or released or whatever phrase we want to use, I think is unfortunate. I think is
Yeah.
problematic. Actually, I think that needs to be discussed. I'd like to hear from her. And I bet what happened was WURD got inundated with right wing. Oh, you guys are in here doing work for Joe Biden, and then they got scared and did that. Well, let me tell you something. Daily Caller, and all these right wing media organizations are working for Donald Trump de facto. Okay, so let's stop it with this idea that we don't have partisan media, but when it's partisan on the left and it's black people, suddenly people have to be fired. I mean, are
Right.
you kidding me?
Right.
So it depends on what that discussion was with regard to the questions. Again, full transparency would have fixed the entire thing. You start the interview, and she did. She had an intro for the interview, and she said, look, we went over the questions with the Biden campaign. So the president is aware of what I was going to ask. But quite frankly, these are questions I was going to ask anyway. How have you benefited the black community? What the heck happened at that debate? How did you specifically benefit Philadelphia and Pennsylvania? I mean, she probably would have asked those anyway.
Anyway, right. Right. So it really, and I think what Lomax has done here is perhaps looking to draw more attention to Word. I don't know if that's her motivation,
Mhm.
but I just think that she handled this totally wrong.
Well,
Unless, of course, the journalist or the host just wanted to leave. I mean, I just think there was no reason here to terminate their relationship.
Well, in fairness to Miss Lomax, she is talking right now on one of her radio stations about the situation. So I want to hear specifically what she says after I'm done here before I jump to that. But but in what you just said, Stacey, I do agree with this. If your big interview comes in and you're the owner of the media platform, you gotta referee that. You got to be involved in that. You got to be finding out, okay, what's going on here. We're interviewing the president of the United States. What, they sent the questions? I mean, so she should have probably known about that. And
Right.
why Miss Lawful Sanders is the villain here, I have no idea. She probably,
Exactly.
literally, honestly, these community journalists, they honestly don't know the formal rules of journalism. And whose responsibility is it to teach them that? Well, the owner. I've owned a few media organizations now, and I've been the person who has had to tell people, hey, do this way. Let's not do it that way. The rules are
Right.
this or whatever. But
Yeah,
every
and it's
news
like you said, though, if you had somebody, if you have people that work for you, so President White House calls, campaign calls, we're gonna have the president of Black Virginia News. I'm pretty sure that person is gonna call. The first call is to Lauren Burke.
Right. Well, absolutely. But it could be, I have a Richmond bureau chief. So my Richmond bureau chief is all
Or
over the place in Richmond. So she gets contacted all the time with stuff. Now, she's a career journalist, though. So she knows what the rules are. But as somebody who's worked in politics, I publicly say on a regular basis, I am a political person who owns a media platform. I am somebody who's worked in politics on the left, exclusively on the left, who writes for Black Press USA, writes for Black Virginia News. If I have a direct conflict, I typically avoid writing about what would be a direct conflict. Okay,
right.
but for Black Virginia News, I'm not doing that. So I will say, and there's going to be something coming up pretty soon, actually, on one of my former bosses, who is Lieutenant Governor Fairfax. There's going to be a transparency statement there. Okay, I worked for this person, and therefore I know these things on a deeper level. And if you think I'm biased because of that, that's fine. But let the audience decide that by just being transparent and saying,
Right.
this is who I am. It's on my LinkedIn, it's on everything else. It's not like I'm hiding, but I'm just saying for WURD, just tell the audience we had a conversation with the campaign. Look, they gave us some questions, and frankly, these are the questions. Half these questions they gave us, we would have said it anyway. So we don't see any problem with that. Here's the interview. That's all you had to say to really avoid a lot of this.
So, Lauren, we keep hearing now more calls for the president to step aside. Now, first and foremost, only two incumbent presidents have dropped out of the race for reelection. And you want to know who and what were the results? Well, they were Democrats, Harry S. Truman and Lyndon B. Johnson. And both in both instances, Republicans then won the White House. Johnson and Truman each announced that they wouldn't seek re-election. It was at least 295 days, Lauren, before the end of their last term. Other presidents who opted against re-election announced their decision before or at the start of their last term. Now, as of today, if Biden drops out, it would be 196 days before the end of his term. That in itself, you would think would kind of cool this talk, this growing monsoon of conversation of him stepping aside. Because it sounds like you can't win.
Yeah, well, this is a unique problem that I don't think we've ever had before. Frank, I can't think of other than maybe FDR. And FDR, of course, passed away in office, sitting in office. And even FDR, I don't think had a mental issue. He had a physical issue. I'm not a doctor, obviously. None of us are physicians. But I think it is safe to say that what we're seeing, if I had to guess, is something diagnosable with regard to the president. The question becomes for the Democrats, a purely political question. Okay, not a medical, a purely political question. Is it easier to push him over the line in 120 days? Or is it easier to switch your candidate 120 days before an election and some 50 before your convention to somebody else, which, by the way, would have to be Vice President Harris? I can't see how it would be anybody else
Yeah, the
other than
Congressional
her.
Black Caucus is really strong in that.
Right.
The one thing that they are united in, if nothing else, is that she would have to be the person.
As they should be. So from a legal standpoint, too, and the money and all that, it's a lot easier to switch to the vice president. And also from a name recognition. But the problem is, and I think this is a unique problem because I can't think historically of another one like this. There's an open question as to whether or not the president can physically and mentally continue. I don't think any political party has had to deal with that question before. And that's a tough one because what we saw on the 27th of June was someone who was struggling to get to ends of sentences and struggling to put thoughts together. That's different from the Vietnam War has blown up and you got the wrong policy and you're emotionally worn down and you then decide you're not going to run for re-election, which is what LBJ did. I just think that, I don't know. I think it's a really tough question for the party, but they got to get their act together really soon, like this week, because if you wait any longer than this week, it's problematic. It's just problematic.
Well,
And
you also run into getting others if there is another candidate, you run into the problem of getting him on the ballot. You know that him or her on the ballot. You know that
right.
that is deadlines are fast approaching as far as getting someone else on the ballot. But then there is so many other things to consider. Power 96 writes in that he says Trump has dementia. He thinks he's running against Obama. We don't talk about the way we talk about the gaffes that the president commits.
Right.
We don't talk about the constant stammering and the constant gas of Donald Trump. We don't focus on that at all. And, Jasmine Crockett said, I don't care if he was off for 90 minutes and didn't put on a performance like people wanted him to put on. She says the reality is that he is 50,000 times better than Trump, and Republicans will not leave Trump. He has 34 felony convictions and still got over 50 pending.
Well, Stacey, to your point, the problem with talking about Donald Trump is that the Democratic Party has decided in public to effectively call their nominee senile and mentally disabled in some way. And if you keep doing that, if you keep feeding the media that content, they're going to play it. Okay. I mean, particularly the New York Times in this moment should be monitored very carefully because the New York Times, of course, was all pissed that they couldn't get an interview with Joe Biden. And also the New York Times can't decide whether or not they actually want to root for democracy in this moment. I'm confused because I can't figure out whether or not the New York Times actually is interested in democracy staying intact or not. I haven't figured that out yet. This is the same New York Times by the way, that effed around in the 1940s with the Nazi regime and couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with that. So I don't know what the New York Times is doing, but it's pretty clear from their reporting that they're all in against President Joe Biden in a time when they know for a fact that a complete pathological liar and lunatic might take the helm of power again at the White House. And if you don't know that by now, New York Times, you seriously need to wake up. They had a major development in the Jeffrey Epstein case. Think about this. This is the New York Times that effectively created the Me Too movement, because it was the brilliant reporting of Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey on Harvey Weinstein that got us all of that information about what Harvey Weinstein's behavior was, the NDAs, all that. That was like an over a year of reporting that turned out to be a book and a movie. I'd read the book, which was excellent. It was excellent reporting. And then they go quiet on the Jeffrey Epstein developments, which I will not detail on this family show, with regard to Donald Trump. That makes no sense to me, New York Times.
I'm glad you said that, because I found that to be quite interesting as well, that there are dozens upon dozens of references of Trump with Epstein and various lawsuits, including one that has so many question marks to it on both sides, with the young girl who was allegedly forced by Trump and Epstein to commit sex acts with another young girl in their presence, and things of that nature. But we hear nothing about that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the New York Times ran a story and I missed it. I don't think it got.
You didn't miss it because they didn't run it.
Okay, I don't think it got the Kantor Twohey treatment. Maybe Kantor and Twohey in the background working on it right now. So I don't want to assume they're not going to do anything ever, because of course they could do something tomorrow. But the New York Times, clearly from their headlines, is showing that they're all in to say that the president doesn't have the mental capability. But it's not the New York Times' fault what the Democratic Party is doing. So you have members of the Democratic Party that for some reason need to be on CNN talking about the president of their party's mental acuity in public for all to see. Now, if somebody can explain to me, as somebody who's been a communications director for a few people, including a CBC member, Andre Carson, if somebody can explain to me why that benefits the party that you belong to sit and talk about, like, let's switch it to the Republicans. What are they doing? So Trump gets accused in the Epstein grand jury documents. They don't say a word. Trump eggs on these people who attacked the U.S. Capitol. They defend Trump on top of not saying anything about the fact that that's probably to me, that's a criminal act. It's sedition. And I don't know why people think it isn't, but suddenly now it's not. They defend whatever Trump does, or they keep their mouth shut. The Democrats are providing content to the media to destroy the presumptive nominee of their party for president at a time when you can ill afford to do that 120 days before an election. I don't understand that. I don't understand why that would ever be good communication strategy, but that's what they're doing.
That's what they're doing. You're calling it out for what it is. There's a couple questions here, Lauren, and I'm not sure this first one. I'm going to just throw it out there. I'm not sure where Bo digitally is going, but he says locally, he or she, locally, North Central Florida, we have witnessed the, quote, whitening of VP Harris. Are we wrong to compare the Democratic Party's applied worth of Mrs. Obama's visibility to the seeming absence of VP Harris's voice to the community of color?
Yeah, I don't know what that means, other than the fact that the mentioning that any sort of whitening of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is a member of AKA. She went to Howard University. You can't get any blacker than that. There's always been this weird undertow from ADOS with regard to, is she black enough and all this other stuff. When she walks through the door, everyone knows she's not white. That's for sure. In our country, that matters. And not only does it, can you tell that it matters in the way she gets attacked by editorial writers at the Washington Post, who all of a sudden have, gotten obsessed about, Kathleen Parker is obsessed about Kamala Harris in a way she was never obsessed about Mike Pence or any other vice president. Yeah, she's black, all right. I mean, she gets a double treatment that nobody I've ever seen as vice president has ever gotten. So not even Dick Cheney, who was a very questionable vice president. And yet, Kamala Harris is getting all this attention. So I'm not sure where that's going. In our country, the way that Black folks are covered, particularly in politics, is basically a throwback to the one drop rule, which is that if any part of your ancestry is Black, you're Black, no matter how you look or anything else. So
Right.
I just would say that I don't know anything about Michelle Obama or any of that. Michelle Obama is not running. A lot of people wish she was, but she's not. And she's declared that she's not interested a trillion times.
And how about, and we on that same topic of the vice president and the disrespect, how about perhaps the most racist headline that you will ever see? The New York Post referring to her as a potential DE and I president. She would be, they said, a DE and I president.
Yeah, the New York Post is owned by Rupert Murdoch. They are white supremacists adjacent. Their entire editorial mission would appear to be to run some of the most negative stories they can about African Americans, typically in New York. New York has about over 2 million Black people in it, and I think it was last year that they had maybe 400 murders, something like that. And the New York Post is very good at trying to amplify every single thing that some Black person who happens to be a criminal is doing, and ignoring what the other 2 million other people in New York are doing who are Black, who have never been involved in a crime in their life. That is what the New York Post does on a regular basis. When it comes to the vice president, of course, they found some columnist to write something. And I think what we have to remember in these moments, and I've certainly learned this in politics, so much runs off of jealousy. So much runs off of people in position sitting someplace in some cubicle who wish they were the person that they were writing about and will never be that person. So I suspect that this guy who I've never heard of, who wrote for the New York Post about Vice President Harris, I'm going to go ahead and say it. He probably is never going to be the Vice President of the United States. So it's with a great deal of envy that people like Kathleen Parker and this person, and I'm saying this, and I know it's brutal to say it, but I've been in editorial board meetings sitting next to the person I worked with at the Washington Post, listening to 8 white folks question that Black candidate. I've only worked for Black folks in politics. Question that Black candidate. I should take that back. I worked for Tom Daschle and George Mitchell. But question that candidate, right? And there's an aura of who does this person think they are sitting here in this position? And particularly in the case of Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, who was only 38 years old when he got into office. He was always the youngest person in the room. Doesn't matter that he went to an Ivy League law school, Columbia. Doesn't matter that he went to Duke. He's got to explain himself, but I've seen it with younger politicians, and I've seen it standing over the shoulder of older politicians. and people think that they get to question these people because how dare you be in that position? So the entire conversation around Vice President Harris, to me, is a lot of these conservative, right-wing, MAGA white males who will never be anything other than somebody writing at some paper talking about Kamala Harris. And of course, before that, talking about President Obama, who of course drove them crazy because he was the smartest person in the room, literally the smartest person in the room when he would walk in. And they hated that. And that's why we got Donald Trump. He's an insecure person who ran because he was ticked off that some Black guy had something that he didn't have. And he actually said that recently. He said, well, the reason that I ran, he said it to Biden, but he also said that it was the same for Obama. He said to Biden, well, I ran because of Joe Biden, because I have to come along and fix things. No, you ran because you were jealous of the first Black president of the United States having something that you didn't have. And your parents told you that's not the way it was supposed to be. That's what this was about. And so this guy writing for the Post doesn't matter, but it's white supremacy adjacent journalism, which we're seeing get bolder and bolder
And
and
bolder.
bolder.
Oh, absolutely. And, I just want to go back to what Mike V was saying, back to our original conversation. He says that the president was just fine for the State of the Union speech a few months ago, but now we need to find another candidate over a 90-minute debate. That's, again, you said it. Democrats just can't get themselves together when they're handed gifts. They don't know how to open those gifts, apparently, Lauren. And you've seen it over and over again. And you said something when you were talking about Lieutenant Governor Fairfax, the former Lieutenant Governor. You said 38, 38 years old. Where are all the young upstarts, if you will, the young, energetic folks that, people seem to be pining for? We know that the president is 81. We know that Trump is 78. Where's the movement to get these younger ones into office, such as the presidency? We haven't. When's the last time we had a young president? Obama.
Yeah, how about that? Well, unfortunately, we can't get the boomer Clinton people off the stage. Is what the problem is. Remember when Barack Obama first ran, they tried to stop him, right? So the DNC apparatus is really set up by the Clinton era folks, starting with the fact that Terry McAuliffe was the DNC chair back in 2004, and they have an uncanny way of always backing somebody in their generation. But that day is about to end in a huge way because people like Pete Buttigieg and Wes Moore, they're not going to sit and wait another 8 years. So 2028 is, frankly, I always say to people who are younger, why aren't you doing this right now? I mean, but we saw it in Virginia where we end up running. I mean, you mentioned Justin Fairfax. They ended up with Governor Glenn Youngkin, Republican, because they decided collectively, they being the Democratic Party of Virginia, decided that their second Black lieutenant governor, the first was Doug Wilder. Doug Wilder was lieutenant governor, then governor, was a criminal, was a sex criminal with no evidence, with no investigation, with no police, and because somebody put out a press release. That's what they decided to do. And they end up destroying in that moment somebody who could have beaten Glenn Youngkin and could have beaten any other Republican who was going to show up. And that was Lieutenant Governor Fairfax. And I defy anybody to tell me I'm wrong on that. That is what the Democratic Party in Virginia did. Thankfully, Tom Perez, shout out to Tom Perez. He was the chair of DNC at that moment. He didn't do that. He didn't put out a press release doing that. But at any rate, the Democratic Party of Virginia had no problem doing that. And I dare say that there's a lack of enthusiasm and sometimes in the party for people like Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum when they were running, because let's just be real. White Democrats do have an issue and a problem with backing the play of Black elected officials who run statewide, even though everyone knows that the base of the party is Black women in terms of loyalty and dependability in supporting the party. They just don't. In the South, it's just such a thing that is off custom that they're scared. They don't want to do it. And also there's this theory that if we back the play of a Black candidate, we're going to tick off some white folks, which I'm not sure. If you watch the Barack Obama performance, I'm not really sure what they're talking about. He built a coalition of younger white folks and young progressive whites, of some Latinos, of Black voters who are the base of the Democratic Party, and he won. So, but then all of a sudden now we get, it's got to be, in the case of the microcosm that is Virginia politics, it had to be Terry McAuliffe out there. I mean, that made no sense because who was pining for Terry McAuliffe? Like, absolutely nobody. So I think the next generation comes in hard in 2028. But the Democratic Party has got to get away from the habit of destroying other Democrats, which they're really good at. And if you look at the details of the Al Franken case, the Andrew Cuomo case, the Justin Fairfax case, and now Joe Biden. Now it's like now we're watching and witnessing them destroy their presumptive nominee for the highest office that nobody had any problem with 6 months ago. And now all of a sudden there's this, we're on national TV destroying the candidate and questioning that literally the comms that we're hearing now from the Democratic Party is that our candidate might be senile. That is what they're telling the nation right now, whether they realize it or not. That is what they're telling.
Right. I mean, there's no question. Right.
Why would you be doing that? And I get they have to have a family discussion. That's true. But you don't have to have it on CNN. So to your point, Stacey, they need to be talking about Donald Trump as much as possible. But the party has become exceedingly good at destroying people who represent the future leadership. I mean, Andrew Cuomo is a boomer, I think. Yeah, he's a baby boomer. And so is Al Franken. But Al Franken was one of the best I've ever seen in committee when it came to questions. And Andrew Cuomo was the best I've ever seen in terms of leadership during COVID. And it was the Democrats that destroyed both of those people. So I don't get it. I don't get what the Democrats are doing to their own people.
Right. And like I said, they also, when you give them gifts, and Trump is you talk about fodder for any type of commercial, campaign commercial. He gives it to you all the time. And then there's Project 2025. And you mentioned about Westmore and others not waiting after 2028. Well, just keep in mind, if they set this government up the way that they plan to, there will not be a 2028 election in all likelihood. They are setting this up as a true dictatorship. They want that. The Department of Justice, one part of Project 2025 that should bother folks, Black folks in particular, Latino folks in particular, is the fact that it calls for the total dismantling of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. There is no more civil. And Trump has said that he wants the Department of Justice to focus its energy and more of its time on anti-white crime. So just think about that for a moment. These are things that are coming up real quick. This
Yeah.
retribution, the Supreme
Mhm.
Court is, they are now unabashedly in Trump's corner.
Yeah, and you're dealing with a Republican nominee who told everybody to put Clorox in their veins to cure COVID, and the Democrats are in here talking about how old Joe Biden is. I mean, I just feel like you can't continue to message like this and win an election. Okay, you just can't. There's so many things about Donald Trump to hit. It's such a target-rich environment in terms of him just running his mouth. But CNN, the media is showing us who they are. I mean, when they don't fact check an entire 90-minute debate, that tells you that they're not interested in facts and they're not interested in the truth and they're not interested in protecting it. That means that the Democrats have to recognize that the media is not going to do the job. They're just not. So the Democrats have to recognize double time that when you get out there and criticize your own candidate, don't bring up the deficiencies and the craziness and the pathological lying of the other candidate, Donald Trump, you're making a massive mistake. You're making a massive mistake. You've got to provide them with as much content as possible to tell people, the American people, the voters, that this person is dangerous. And they're not doing that right now. And I don't think they're going to be doing it this week. I think what happens tomorrow is an explosion of people running their mouth about their candidate, Joe Biden, and actually doing more damage to Joe Biden.
Yeah.
That's what I think is
Well,
going to happen tomorrow.
and again, Project 2025, like we said, Black and brown people in particular, but others. For instance, you talk about voting. Well, read Project 2025, and it tells you that they don't want women, white or Black or Hispanic, women, period, to vote anymore. They don't want women, of course, to control what happens with their bodies. We know that already. But they also want to outlaw any type of birth control. So you think about what's going on with this. They want to eliminate the Department of Education. It's Lauren, what is it setting up to be? The man said on now he amended his statement to say on day one he would be a dictator. Um, they're setting up a dictatorship, and
Yeah.
people are following this
Mhm.
lockstep. And you got some Black folks following along with this. Oh, they'll say stuff like, "Okay, you guys, Black folks have been led by the Democrats, and where's it gotten you? Where's it gotten you?" And that may be true. That it may not have gotten Black folks or Latino folks far at all backing Democrats. But at the same time, let me put it this way: you have a choice of being free and living in a shack or being enslaved and being and picking cotton out of the fields. I mean, that's what you're choosing here.
Well, the
If that's
entire
your if that's how you see it.
yeah, the entire Project 2025 agenda is really seems like it wants to dismantle anything that would disproportionately benefit Black people, whether it's healthcare, the constant obsession around DEI as if Black people are in control of everything. They're always trying to run this game that we're in control of everything because of affirmative action. That's all nonsense. If you look at who the CEOs are in the country, who owns the sports teams, who's on the corner offices, who's on Wall Street. All of that is nonsense, is complete nonsense. I just think that what happened there is pretty obvious is that, President Obama gets into office. There's an uptick in discussion in the media and in general about African Americans, the progress or lack thereof. Certain people who are insecure and or racist had a problem with that, and one of them being Donald Trump. And of course, now all of a sudden, he's running for office on this platform that is basically a white supremacist adjacent political platform. Because I don't recognize anything about the Republican Party as compared to Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush. They're not even talking about policy. They're talking about dismantling things in a way that Ronald Reagan would not have talked about it that way, and nor would George Bush, Senior or W. And so that's strange, really. I mean, that is what is that? That's Steve Bannon. I don't even know that it's ideological. I think it's resentment politics and white grievance politics. And it is a way to try to gin up support for the smaller and smaller group that is supporting what we can, I think, loosely call the Republican Party. It's really the MAGA movement. And the media is barely, what is the New York Times talking about? They did a whole story on how, a host at WURD got the questions from, Jasmine Harris. I don't know. I mean, I just think that for me is a fail. Again, if you can look at the New York Times editorial page and figure out whether or not they're interested in whether or not the United States is about to become a dictatorship, then let me know what you find. I can't figure out what that paper believes in. I mean, they would, if you believe in democracy, then you would have had to have read the First Amendment. And I'm not sure that these people sitting up in Manhattan care about any of that. And so they've got everybody talking about something else. And unfortunately, and I think this day will come where this is not the case, but right now, unfortunately, the New York Times drives so much of the conversation because all these other media outlets follow their play. And that is a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And listen, again, along the lines of dictatorship, he's been teasing it, but he still hasn't done it. And that is select a vice president. Will he select a vice president?
Oh, he'll definitely select a vice president. My money is on JD Vance. It's got to be somebody that will do anything and say anything and has no moral fiber whatsoever. It will just do anything and say anything for Donald Trump. There's not too many people on the list who won't. The guy up there, Bergeron, I don't know him that well, but they like him because he's got a bunch of money. But again, he'll do anything and say anything for Donald Trump. That's the first, order of business. And talk incessantly about brown people coming over the southern border. That's just what you got to have that. This is just so based on fear. The irony is so huge that so many of these people in their ancestry had relatives who came over here and were treated the same way as they're trying to treat Mexicans coming over the border. And the same things were said. The exact same language was used, right? They're bringing crime and they're bringing drugs and all this other stuff. Same thing was said about Italian Americans, Irish Americans. So it's so crazy to watch these people and they don't even know their own history, the history of their own family, right? I mean, this is it's an amazing thing to watch, but it's born of ignorance. But, the Democratic Party, once again, is really the only vessel, because if you don't have the media paying attention, and I guess CNN and the New York Times have decided that this is no big deal, apparently. Let's talk about Joe Biden for a week straight, where the other guy was standing up there lying the entire. At least do both. I mean, you could do both. They're not going to do both. So that's problematic because that leaves the Democratic Party as the only messaging entity to reverse course here on what's going on around President Biden.
Yeah, Power 96 says, I will keep it real. Black people have been voting for the lesser of two evils since the 15th Amendment was passed. This presidential election has one evil person, and his name is Trump. And he goes on to say that Uncle Tim, we know Tim Scott and Byron Butter Biscuits Donalds will clean out Trump's bedpan on live TV. And David Youngblood says, you can count on white folks voting their Negro interests first. Again, folks, Project 2025 is real. They've been implementing parts of that, and we don't hear about it. We don't hear about it, Lauren. You've articulated why on a lot of things, and it's just not the media, the mainstream media's. It's not in their playbook. it's not in their, they feel it's not in their interest.
Yeah, but
And look, there was
mhm,
a tweet, and I haven't independently verified this,
mhm.
but it mentions CNN and all of these top CEOs on these networks are Trump donors.
Right. I saw that. I wondered if that was accurate. It probably is, because the tax bracket issue would make sense on that. You know, that I gotta double check that tweet to see, make sure it's accurate. Probably is, but look at the ideological decision making, and I do use the word ideological decision making when you're agreeing with the Trump campaign that there should be no fact checking for a 90-minute debate. Why is CNN agreeing to that? Why is a news organization agreeing that there should be no fact checking and no protection of the truth during a
A
presidential
news
debate?
organization.
Right. Not the campaign, the news organization. Now, of
Right.
course, it's Biden's fault for co-signing. It's Biden
Right.
campaign's fault for co-signing. I mean, they
Right.
definitely made a series of decisions that put him at a huge disadvantage out there. But without regard to even when we get to that, it was CNN that, oh, yeah, okay, you don't want to have any fact checking? Oh, okay. Are you kidding me? And you know that the next debate is Fox, so you know that's not going to have any fact
Oh
checking.
gosh.
And you also know that one of the candidates is a pathological liar who's using your network as a platform to elevate and amplify his pathological lying. So you know all of those things. We've been sitting here for what, 8 years now. We know who Donald Trump is, and CNN makes that decision with the same personnel involved, by the way. I mean, Jake Tapper was there 8 years ago, and so was
Yep.
Dana Bash. I'm sure it was above their pay grade, that decision. But still, if you're the journalist who's the cog in that wheel, you should be protesting something. And this is why the fact that Word would fire Lawful Sanders over that, and then we're sitting here talking about the president having all those,
There's the story.
the former president's been amplified to 50 million people lying, and then they have, you know, Dan Dale, their fact checker, who I mean, the absurdity of this is so deep.
Yeah.
CNN has a fact checker named Dan Dale, who's one of the best journalists in the country. They put him on after the debate. He runs down 2 straight minutes of what Donald Trump was lying about. And the 2 anchors during the debate don't bother to do any of that in real time, because why? Why are we protecting the truth? Well, what is the point of journalists if you're not protecting the truth? If that's not your core function, then what are you here for? We could have had Vanna White come out with the questions on a card every time there was a question. If you're not gonna make the candidates answer the question, and you're not gonna protect the truth, then what the hell do we have moderators for? That
And
makes
that
no sense.
and that shows once again the blatant hypocrisy of CNN to make a big deal out of Word getting questions when you had, like you said, 50 million people watching, and you refuse as a news organization to fact check 90 minutes of lies.
CNN is in no moral position to ask anything about anybody about any type of journalism they may be doing. Victor Blackwell and Abby Phillip need to walk out of their office and into the office of CNN CEO and have that conversation. They are in no moral position to question anybody else's journalism on anything. They're the ones that are actually amplifying somebody who will probably end up, you know, if he gets in office again, Donald Trump, destroying the country as we know it. And you're talking about a 4-question interview that was 15 minutes on WURD. I mean, come on, man. You get your priorities. There's got to be some triage involved in journalism where you're deciding what's important and what isn't. If you don't have triage, then you're talking about nonsense, right? And the most important thing right now is the fact that we have a self-declared dictator fascist that wants to become president of the United States again. You didn't see what he did the first time, right? With what happened the first time. So I just don't understand what CNN is doing with regard to the Word story. And I don't understand what the Democratic Party is doing with regard to figuring out their nominee. They do have to figure out their nominee, but they don't have to do it live on TV.
They've made it an issue. Now they got to figure it out.
Well, they got to figure it out real
this.
fast. And you know that, I know the ship has sailed. There's no point in talking about the past, but wow, you didn't think that this was an issue 6 months ago. There's nothing that we know now that we didn't know about Joe Biden. We know the same thing that we knew. It was encapsulated in 90 minutes. Okay, well, we had seen some of that before. So I'm not impressed by, you know, waiting 120 days before an election day to switch out your nominee. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me to watch this,
No,
but
it's
here
almost,
we are.
yeah, it's almost like saying that we surrender the election.
Yeah, it is.
That's what it sounds like the Democrats are doing here. They will deny that, of course, but your actions, they say actions speak louder than words. Lauren Burke, we enjoyed your words this morning, bringing everything into its proper perspective, and we look forward to continue reading Black Virginia News or Virginia Black News. That's for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah, Black Virginia News.
And
I'll be at the White House and on Capitol Hill this week. We'll see what happens.
all right, so we'll see what happens. Lauren will have it for you guys. And Power 96, expect a call from Greer. And everybody expect that I'm going to be looking for you to subscribe to our YouTube page at LIBK-news. And let's get it done. And we will see you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.